Welcome to Season 2 of Feeding Families on the EcoParent Podcast Network. And don't forget to check out the new season of our other top podcast, Raising Kids Naturally. But before diving into this episode, a little shameless self-promotion from my son.
My dad started EcoParent when I was in the womb. Now it's pretty much the only parenting magazine still in print. If you like the podcast, you'll probably like the magazine too. You can subscribe online. You might also be interested in EcoParent's online courses, especially the kids nutrition and kids wellness courses. Stick around until the end of the episode and my dad will give you a discount code. Enjoy the show.
The Feeding Families podcast is all about food and nutrition for kids. We bring you new ideas and inspiration for your kitchen and answers to your food questions to help you overcome the very real, very frustrating food-related challenges so many parents are trying to figure out. I'm your host, Jess Sherman, family wellness educator, author, practitioner of functional and holistic nutrition, and mother. I want you to develop unwavering confidence in the choices you make every day. So let's get into Feeding Families. Hey families, welcome back. I am wrapping up this season today, season 2, and I want to look back at some of the things that we covered in the last 12 episodes. And I also want to give you some direction about how to move forward and what to look for and what to do if you're feeling still kind of stuck with all this. You want your kids to be healthier, but you're not quite sure what to focus on. Something I find myself always saying is that learning stuff without knowing what to do with it can be really paralyzing, especially for parents. And especially when your child is struggling through some kind of a health issue and you just want them to be healthy. So, with this season, I didn't want to just throw a bunch of information at you, a bunch of tactics, right? I hope that I've achieved two things this season. One is to frame out a big picture framework for how you can create what I'm calling a culture of nourishment in your home. That's how to think about the factors that are involved in raising a healthy family and how to set parameters and patterns around how you're teaching your kids how to take care of themselves. This is such important work. It is so core to what we do as parents. So, in the first episode of this season, so that's episode 15, which is called Creating a Culture of Nourishment and Foundations for Resilient Health, I gave you this big picture. It's what I use with my clients. I call it the 5 nourishment needs. It's really a zoomed out framework. It's a container in which you can put all of the strategies and the tactics that you're learning about from, the books you're reading, the summits you're listening to, the various podcasts and practitioners you're working with. Wherever you're getting your information, you need a container to put that information in, all of those tactics, so that they make sense, right? So be sure to listen to that episode 15 if you haven't already. I don't want you to get stuck in the forest, right? Stuck in the forest of tactics. When that happens, it really is, you can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak. We're stuck in the weeds and things get really confusing really quickly. And we have limited energy, we have limited budgets, limited time, and we need to know why we're focusing on what. And we need to know what the biggest levers are for us to focus on that are going to help our kids, right? So that episode 15, zooms you out so you can really see the big picture. And I find that doing that is a really great way to reduce overwhelm and gain clarity. And when you do that, you gain confidence as a parent, right? It helps you decide what to focus your limited energy on. And that's what brings the confidence. So at least it does for me. So I offer it to you, hoping that it helps. The second thing that I hope to have achieved through our episodes this season is to have given you some really practical tactics or action steps, right? You need to be able to see the forest, but you also need to be able to see the trees, right? And I hope through our conversations with my guests that you have pulled some ways to execute on each of the nourishment needs. We had a lot of great guests this season. In case you're just tuning in for the first time, I want to highlight some of the things for you in just a second. But the next question to ask, and what I really want to focus the guts of this episode on, is what next? Right? What else can I do? And what if you're in a situation where, okay, Jess, I've heard you. I understand. This is all great. I've implemented a culture of nourishment in my home. I understand what you're talking about, but my kids are still struggling. Right? What do I do then? Is there more? And yes, there is more. And I'm going to frame that out for you today. But before I do that, let's just review some of the resources that you now have in season 2 of the Feeding Families podcast. Okay. Just about every guest that I had on the show touched on the importance of the first nourishment need, which is real whole food, right? We had Mira Desi come and she talked about food labels and how to be efficient in the grocery store. We had Jessie Thomas from Sustainable Wellness come and she came to talk about food choices and managing time, managing money, connecting to nourishing food sources, which sometimes don't seem to be cost effective or cost friendly, but we talked about some ways that you can do it. Dr. Nicole Berkins from Berkeley Life came and talked about nitric oxide and how to get that essential nutrient that nobody's talking about, well, starting to talk about now. It powers all nutrients and how we can get this from whole foods. I like to work at the foundations. I like to give you, strategies that are going to give you big bang for your buck. And so learning about nitric oxide is one of those things. And of course, we talked about picky eating, right? No podcast called Feeding Families would be sufficient without a conversation about picky eating. So Alyssa Arnheim and I talked about some of the root causes of selective eating behavior, strange eating behaviors, frustrating eating behaviors, and then there's a great episode on that. As I keep emphasizing, though, nourishment goes way beyond the food that we're putting in our kids' mouths, right? Restorative sleep is a second nourishment need. And we covered that in an episode with Dr. Alexa Toronto, who came to talk about optimizing sleep for kids and what to do if they're not sleeping well. Clean air and clean water, those conduits of health that so often get overlooked. That was our third nourishment need. And Dr. Song and I talked about how breath can activate the vagus nerve and how it can also improve gut health. Mike Feldstein from Jasper came to talk about the importance of clean air quality, and how that affects our bodies. And he cleaned up some of the confusion about air purification. Dr. Catherine Clinton came back to our podcast for a second episode. She was here season 1 as well. We talked about water, and we talked about water probably unlike how you've ever heard it discussed before. So definitely listen to that one. Our fourth category of nourishment was movement, laughter, and play, those powerful tools for activating the social engagement part of the nervous system and building resilience and helping kids thrive in a world that feels really stressful to them and overwhelming. So Melissa Bufundos and I had a great conversation about how to support the balance between energy need and energy expenditure, along with how nutrition supports stress and recovery. And we did that in the context of talking about nourishing young athletes. That was the episode. But really, even if your child is not a competitive athlete, this conversation about balancing energy need and energy expenditure, I think, will be very helpful. And then our fifth and final nourishment need, which is connection, safety, and sense of purpose. Well, listen, we didn't really have an episode specifically on that topic, but just about all my guests wove strategies for connection and stress management and agency into our conversations. It's really core to everything that you're doing as a parent, really connecting with your kids, seeing your kids, listening to your kids, and helping them engage as active participants of your family. So, again, if you missed it, please go back to the first episode of the season, which is episode 15, Creating a Culture of Nourishment and Foundations for Resilient Health, where I laid out this bigger picture and explained why I chose these as the 5 nourishment needs. And just know that when we nourish our kids by focusing on these 5 things, we create this culture of nourishment in our homes. We're doing 2 really, really important things when we do that. First of all, we're teaching our kids how to take care of themselves, right? And we're modeling for them what self care looks like. Such crucial learning for them to learn while they're under our roofs so that when they go out into the big world, they have these strategies. They know what it looks like. The second thing that we're doing when we focus on these 5 nourishment needs is we're actually shifting their physiology. We're shifting it in a productive, positive direction. Now, we could get all biochemical about it and we could talk about underlying processes like detoxification and methylation and the gut brain connection and the endocrine system and all of this, which is really interesting. But the bottom line is when we focus on these 5 things that I talk about, we are given the human body what it has evolved to want and need and expect. And when we do that, we allow it to do what it's programmed to do. We support its natural programming, which is to learn and grow and thrive. But things can go sideways. Life is life. It might be as simple as just focusing on these 5 things. And I do want to emphasize sometimes I see incredible changes when we focus on these things. But sometimes it's not so simple. Something else is going on, right? So when I work with families, I start by focusing them on nourishment, right? It's just fundamental and we see where we get. And after a while, one of 3 things usually happens. The first thing is things are going great, right? Whatever symptoms they were concerned about, they start to dissolve, they start to soften, kids start to feel better, parents start to feel confident. All is going well, right? And they're like, look at me, right? And then they look at me and they're like, what? Really? Was it that simple? It's a huge win. And this is awesome. Now, the second and the third thing that can happen are related. One is that parents get confused and they get overwhelmed because focusing on all of these things is too much to handle and they just have too many balls in the air and they feel like they're digging out of a hole because they're trying to restructure their entire way of thinking, their entire way of being. Things have really slipped and it gets to be too much for everyone. So then they end up just kind of slipping back into old habits. The related scenario is that they're doing the best that they can, but there are elements of the 5 nourishment needs that they just can't get a handle on. Like, the kids just never seem well rested no matter how much sleep they get, right? They've dialed in bedtime, they're doing all of the things, but their kids are still exhausted. Or they're nourishing, they're giving lots of fuel, they're putting energy in the tank, but their kids are still too lethargic or they still won't get off the couch, right? Or they're still addicted to the video games or whatever, right? Or they shut you out. You're trying to connect and you're trying to do all of the things, but they just shut you out. They don't really want to have any part of it. Or, maybe they're addicted to crappy food and you find wrappers under their mattress, even though, you thought you had a handle on the real food situation. Right. So you've hit a ceiling. You get it, you understand, you're trying to implement, but you hit a ceiling and you're not seeing the results that you want to see. I've seen all of these situations and so much more, right? So I want to outline some of my suggestions for what to do next for each situation in case you find yourself there. And listen, if you have a different situation, something that maybe I didn't think about, send me a message and let's talk about it because probably it's some variation of this. So let's go with situation number 1 first. It's not a problem, right? Things are going well and you're doing great. And this framework is working for you. And I'm super glad. I'm excited for that. So please send me a note. Let me know because it helps other parents gain confidence in the approach, and it helps me carry on doing what I'm doing with educating parents about all of this. There will be times when some of the balls are going to drop. There will be times when your kids put up a fuss. There will be times where there's, good stretches, bad stretches, times when you're traveling and everything falls off the plate, right? You are not going to do it perfectly all the time. That's not what we're aiming for. We're not looking for perfect. I would be astonished if any parent could master all of this and do it perfectly every single day. No, that's not what we want. What you'll find though is that as you practice this, as you stick to this culture of nourishment and these nourishment needs become habits, you no longer have to think about them so much anymore, right? Your kids can start to take them on. You can start to transfer the responsibility of nourishing from your shoulders to their shoulders, right? And you have a framework to come back to when you need it. What I suggest you do is, if you haven't already, pull back the veil on what you're doing and call your kids' attention to why things are going so well. This helps transfer the reins over to them, right? Now, how you do this is going to depend on your kids. It's going to depend on their age, their stage of development, all kinds of things, but it is going to lighten your load. So that's always a win. Hey parents, this episode of the Feeding Families podcast is being brought to you by the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. CSNN is committed to supporting the growth of holistic nutrition professionals and other healthcare practitioners by offering continuing education workshops. The Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops help professionals get certified in the areas of holistic nutrition that benefit their practice and their clients. Certificate packages such as immune support and cognitive support are also available. Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops are available at select CSNN branches and through distance education. You can visit csnn.ca/programs/AHN to learn more about these Advanced Holistic Nutrition Workshops or follow the links in the show notes. There are two really great times to have a conversation with your kids around nourishment. Jen Pike and I talked about this when she came to talk about nourishing teen hormones in episode 13. You definitely want to have a listen to that. You can talk about this when things are going really well, or you can talk about it when things are going really badly. Those are the two best times to talk about nourishment. So, if things are going well, the conversation might be something like, hey, wow, I see like your energy or your grades or your skin or your mood or whatever. It's really good these days since we've been focusing on water and sleep. Did you notice that? Or whatever it is you're focusing on, right? I'm really proud of you for taking such good care of yourself. So talk to them about it when things are going well. And it doesn't have to be a big, lecture, but just calling their attention to like, oh, since we've been focusing on this, you're really feeling good. Awesome. The second time you can talk about this, another good time to talk about this is when they're slipping, when they're not doing so great, right? When their acne comes back, or they're feeling tired or lethargic or apathetic, or they're going through a grumpy stretch or whatever it is for them, right? Their tummy starts hurting again. And it may be something like, oh, I've noticed that you're really not feeling so great these days. Remember back in January when you were doing so well? What were we doing then that we aren't doing now? Get curious with them. And if their kids are older, they might be able to pinpoint it. If you've introduced this framework of the 5 nourishment needs, maybe they'll be able to pinpoint it. Oh, I've just been eating junk food. I'm gonna get back to not eating that. Or yeah, right. I lost my water bottle and never replaced it, and I haven't been drinking water. Whatever it is, right? Just get curious with them. If your kids are younger, they might say, oh, I have no idea, right? Then you can pull out the framework. You can be like, well, here are 5 things that we need to nourish our bodies. Which is one that we can start to work on so you can feel a bit better, right? You'll find support in one or several of those things. So, scenario one is awesome. And if you need support keeping all those balls in the air and you want to surround yourself with other amazing parents who are focusing on creating a culture of nourishment in their homes, just consider joining our membership or get in touch. There are ways we can support you. Now, what about scenarios 2 and 3, right? It's feeling too hard. You feel like you're crawling out of a pit. Nobody is listening to you, right? Or you're doing the best that you can, but you're hitting a ceiling and things aren't how you'd like them to be yet, right? What about that? Okay, so now it's time for some support. But now you're going into getting support with some information under your belt, right? Maybe you need some more fundamental knowledge, right? To feel confident in the structures that you're setting down, right? Maybe nobody in your family is following your instructions or following your suggestions because it doesn't make sense to them. And you can't explain why they need to do all of this because you don't really understand it either. So maybe it's more information that you need, right? To explain your motivation. Maybe it's to your parenting partner, maybe it's to your kids. Or it's possible that something else is going on in your body that's creating kind of a roadblock. And this is where functional nutrition really shines because we have functional nutrition tools to be able to peer inside the body to see what the heck is going on in there. What's blocking progress? Where are the roadblocks? Right. So let's go there now to see like some of the things that could be blocking progress. Because as you know me by now, I like frameworks. And of course, I have a framework for the core nourishment needs, but I also have a framework for what could be blocking progress. One of my superpowers is being able to see patterns. I'm really good at seeing the big picture. And this is what my experience has taught me. When basic nourishment needs are being met to the best of a parent's ability, but a child is still struggling, there's usually at least one or sometimes several of the following 5 things that are throwing a wrench in the plans. Okay, here they are. What I'm about to outline for you are 5 major sources of inflammation. If you've been following me on Instagram or you've been following my podcast, you'll know that inflammation is what throws a wrench in the plans, right? When nourishment just, you're trying, but it's not working, there is inflammation and you need to figure out where the source of inflammation is. So, why this matters is because when there is unchecked inflammation in the body, the nervous system continually senses or perceives messages of threat. And when that happens, when the body is continually under threat, getting these messages of threat, a whole cascade is initiated. And downstream effects can show up as mental problems, emotional problems, or physical symptoms. What we have to do is find the sources of inflammation, tone those down, turn the volume down so that the nervous system can relax and actually hear the messages of safety and calm. We want to turn up the messages of safety and calm. We want to turn down the messages of threat. And that requires that we find sources of inflammation. When we do that, everything gets better. Okay. So, if you've addressed the core nourishment needs that we've talked about to the best of your ability, but you want to optimize things even further, the 5 main sources of stress that run interference that I have found in children are these. The first is nutrient imbalance. They lack certain crucial nutrients. Maybe this is because they're not eating them. Maybe it's because they have an increased genetic need for them. Maybe it's because they're not absorbing them well because their digestion's all messed up. But lacking certain crucial nutrients is one of those things that is going to cause inflammation and cause the nervous system to amplify those messages of threat. Second, they're having a reaction to foods that they're eating. Now, I don't mean a food allergy, I mean food sensitivity. And it's usually temporary. We have a few episodes on food sensitivity, but foods could be a source of inflammation, and that could be robbing the body of crucial nutrients and toning up this message of threat. The third is that they're not effectively managing their toxic load. So, whatever toxins, some toxins are created in the body just through metabolic processes. Some toxins come in from the outside, from our environment, right? And this all creates our toxic load. It could be because genetically they're just not very good at it. It could be because their detoxification pathways are clogged or sluggish. It could be because they have a particularly high toxic load or toxic exposure. For whatever reason, they're not efficiently managing their toxic load, and that is putting pressure on the nervous system, turning up this message of threat and keeping inflammation really high. The fourth main stumbling block is that they have disturbances in their gut ecosystem. A lot of you have heard about the gut brain connection, about the microbiome. We've talked about it on this podcast. I'm sure you've heard about it elsewhere as well. When we have disturbances in our gut ecosystem, we have inflammation locally and systemically sometimes, and that turns up the messages of threat. And the last one is that they have an underlying infection that you don't know about. This could be something like Epstein-Barr or Lyme or Babesia or strep or something like that. When there is an underlying infection, the immune system's working really hard. There's a lot of inflammation, and the nervous system hears messages of threat loud and clear. When the messages of threat and fear and worry are loud and clear, the messages of calm and safety and I'm going to be okay tend to be dulled. And as I say, this can show up as mental and emotional symptoms. It can also show up as physical symptoms. So, just as there are 5 nourishment needs, there are also 5 stressors that interfere with a child's health and resilience because they are sources of inflammation. Raising resilient kids requires that we balance those out, right? More of the nourishment needs, lightening the stress load. Only now, as I've gained more clinical experience, I've better fleshed out what contributes to that stress load. But the fundamental formula is still the same, right? More of what they need and finding the sources of stress and inflammation. And when we do this, we get better energy, more stable energy, better skin, better focus, better memory, better sleep, better sense of self. Everything gets better. And this is what I call resilience, resilient health. It's really exciting to me that we live in a time where we can actually use functional testing to figure out what's going on. We can make some educated guesses, but we can also peer inside the body and see like what's actually happening in there. Where are our strongest leverage points? The less exciting part of that is that those tests cost money and they're not accessible everywhere to everyone, right? And I hope that in the next, 10 years or so, that's going to change. Cost is going to come down. Maybe insurance is going to start covering this stuff. But now you know what questions to ask on behalf of your child. Humans are 99.9% genetically identical, right? And in functional nutrition, we like to talk about bioindividuality and each person needs a unique plan and, let's see what's going on with your particular body. And that can be true, but really there are some broad brushstrokes that we can take. We know that every single human child has the same 5 fundamental needs, right? These nourishment needs. They need real food. They need clean air and clean water. They need movement and play. They need sufficient sleep, optimal sleep. They need connection and a felt sense of safety with the adults around them. That is what the body has evolved to want and to expect. It's what the body needs to develop and grow optimally. The 5 stressors that I outlined, that's where the bioindividuality can lie, right? Which stress is getting in the way for your particular child? I don't know. I don't know your child. But the more kids that I work with, the stronger I see this pattern play out. It's one of those 5 things. So now, armed with this information, you can find someone who will help you ask the right questions, who will help you get strategic and be systematic about it so you can figure out which is your strongest lever to pull. I really hope that makes sense, because when I see people coming into our programs or coming in as a private client, often they have all this disjointed information. They have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle and they've been working really hard to help their kids, but they don't have a container to put it in. And so it's just this mess of information everywhere, right? And when we can contextualize it, when we can put it into this framework, okay, which of the 5 nourishment needs are you doing really well? Which needs some work? Which of the stressors have you already taken a look at? Which are you missing? That's where we get clarity, and out of clarity comes confidence. So, things are just not okay with kids right now, and that's what keeps me going, right? My passion has become mental wellness and brain health, because that's the realm that terrifies me most when it comes to my kids' generation. If we can really optimize, turn on their brain so that they feel comfortable and confident and ready to learn and ready to grow, that's when the kids feel really successful, and good physical health really trickles down from that. I read a statistic. This was for US children, but the statistic was that by the age of 40, half the population of Americans will have experienced a mental health problem. By age 40, 50%. But the more striking, more shocking piece of this to me was that half of those problems were established by age 14. This is when they're living under our roof. This is where we can really help them. They're eating our food. They're sleeping in our beds. They are living under our roofs, right? This is the prime time to teach our kids what they need to know about their bodies. And so this is why I've recorded this podcast. And I hope that it gets into as many hands of as many parents as possible so that you know how to do that. It can be really hard sometimes to get a good pulse on the inner emotional life of our kids, right? Especially our teens and our preteens. So we don't know what's going on in their minds unless we have very, very good, open communication, which some of us have and some of us don't. But all of us can watch their growing bodies, right? And since the brain and the body are connected, they work together. The more we can help our kids take care of their bodies, the more we are also helping them take care of their minds, take care of their brains. And this, I think, is the most important place that we can put our energy as parents. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope I've given you something to chew on. Please get in touch if this makes sense, or if you have questions for me, and I'll record more podcasts to answer your questions. Sit with this, use what resonates, and please reach out if you need support. That's all for now. I really hope that season 2 of the Feeding Families podcast has been helpful to you. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe. And if you feel called to, share it with another family who needs to hear it. There are more tools from me at jesssherman.com/learn and jesssherman.com/membership, alongside all the great resources you'll find at EcoParent. Things are changing for kids, and the more we come together in conversation as parents, the more we can find ease and joy as we raise the next generation together. I look forward to seeing you back here next time. Until then, keep at it. You have the most important job in the world.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If so, please consider leaving a review and subscribing to the podcast. If you think this podcast is great, our host, Jess Sherman, has condensed everything you need to know to nourish your family into a truly fantastic 7-hour video course. You can learn more at ecoparent.ca/learn. It will change the way you think about feeding your family. You might also be interested in our Kids Wellness course, taught by Dr. Leslie Solomonia. As a thank you for listening, I'd like to offer you a 15% discount on any one of our online courses or any subscription to EcoParent magazine. Just head on over to ecoparent.ca, hit the Eco Shop button in the navigation bar, and use code FEEDING15 at checkout. All caps, no spaces, that's FEEDING15. Till next time.